check out the streaming schedule on Jaguar Gator 9 for the month of August. We've got 14 more preseason games coming up, plus a few Q&A streams, and of course, live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch and simulcast on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. And now, on with our feature presentation. Remember this past season when there was a really bizarre and stupid controversy involving the Jacksonville Jaguars when it came to them selling playoff tickets before they even clinched a spot in the playoffs? If you were on social media or follow the news, when the Jags went on their incredible second half run, there were a lot of people criticizing the team because they were selling tickets for a hypothetical playoff game. However, if you knew anything about NFL rules, you knew that this wasn't a case of the Jags being cocky or confident that they would win the AFC South and make it to the playoffs, but rather, this was literally mandated by NFL rules. Any team that has a shot at making it to the playoffs and has the division lead at a certain point late in the season must, by default, put playoff tickets on sale. It's a precautionary measure. The last thing you want to do is put tens of thousands of tickets on sale at the same time, because that's how you get websites crashing, and that's how you get heavy bot activity. On top of that, especially back in the days before ticket buying was done online, and when you had to physically buy the tickets, you didn't want to put all the tickets on sale just days before the game, because if you did that, the ticket booth at the stadium would be overwhelmed, surrounding ticket booths would be overwhelmed, and there's a risk that if the tickets are being mailed, that they will not arrive in time. This has been a long-standing policy, and for good reason. You have a shot at the playoffs and hosting a playoff game, you put the playoff tickets on sale, even if you haven't clinched a spot in the playoffs yet. Which is what makes this story all the more bizarre and all the more crazy. Because this team right here is the New Orleans Saints, and in 1979, much like a lot of teams, they had their sights on the playoffs. And as the season was coming to an end, the Saints looked like, for the first time ever, they had a legitimate shot at making it to the postseason and playing some additional football. So you would think that they would put the playoff tickets on sale, right? However, imagine the NFL telling a team, "Not so fast, my friend. You guys stink, and you're not making the playoffs, so don't even bother." Well, that's what happened with the Saints in 1979, in a bizarre controversy and an insane story that we're going to take a deep dive into today. Because this is the story behind one of the strangest controversies, considering the circumstances, of the entire 1979 NFL postseason. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand how the Saints were doing entering this week to truly evaluate their playoff chances. Historically speaking, the Saints had not been a good team. Not in the slightest bit. Not only have the Saints never made it to the playoffs before, but they had not even so much as finished a season with a winning record. It was that dire. Prior to the 1978 season, the most wins that the Saints had in a season was 5. And in 1978, when the team went 7-9 and set a franchise record for the most wins in a season, it was shocking, and there was a sense of elation around the Saints. This was a team that had never even come close to sniffing the playoffs. Through their first 12 seasons, the Saints had a combined record of 46, 119, and 5, winning just 27% of the games that they played in. This is all to say that no one really believed in the Saints, and you couldn't really blame them for it. As even after a 1978 season, where they weren't god-awful for the first time ever, they still entered 1979 with the 6th worst odds of any team to win the Super Bowl. But in 1979, something happened for the first time ever. It was, in the eyes of some, a miracle. Because in 1979, the New Orleans Saints were actually good now. I know that it's kind of hard to believe, but even though the team started off with an 0-3 record, the team quickly rebounded, got their season together, and became one of the hottest teams in all of football. and an opponent that you didn't want to face. After their 0-3 start, the Saints proceeded to go 7-3 over the next 10 games, not just equaling their franchise record for most wins in a season with 3 games to go, but doing so in rather convincing fashion. Through 13 weeks, the Saints had an offense that, quite simply, could not be stopped, as they had scored 306 points, which was the top total in the NFC, and came out to an average of 23.5 points per game. This also included 92 points over their last 3 games, or more than 30 points per game in that stretch. Archie Manning was playing some great football under center at quarterback. Chuck Muncie, the team's first-round pick from 1976, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, was an absolute machine at running back, already amassing over 1,150 yards from scrimmage and finding the end zone 10 times. And Wes Chandler was a heck of a wideout who opened up the passing game a ton, picking up over 1,000 yards on the season. The quarterback, running back, wide receiver trio of Manning, Muncie, and Chandler, all of whom made it to the Pro Bowl that season, was one of the best in all of football. And it honestly might have been the best in football, excluding the obvious top 2 in Pittsburgh and Dallas. And just to give you an idea of how good the Saints were at this point, through the first 13 weeks, they had a point differential of plus 37, which was the second best in the entire NFC, only behind the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who had outscored their opponents by 63 points by this point. If you told people 2 years before in 1977 that the top 2 teams in point differential at this point in 1979 would be Tampa Bay and New Orleans, as in the team that lost 26 straight games, and the team that somehow lost to the team that lost 26 straight games, they would look at you like you had 5 heads. However, this point differential of plus 37 through 13 games was not just good. By Saints standards, it was otherworldly, and that is not an exaggeration. Here's a look at the point differential of the Saints through the first 13 weeks of every single season up until that point, from when they became a team in 1967 until now. And you can see that it seemed like the 1979 Saints were playing a completely different sport than their peers. They were not only in the negatives every year, but they were well in the negatives, with a combined point differential through 13 weeks from 1967 to 78 of minus 1,282, or minus 106.8 points per season, or minus 8.2 points per game, coming out to more than 2 possessions per game. That is obviously abysmal. The 1979 season, though, gave Saints fans something that they never had before. It gave them hope. It gave them a fun football team to watch. And most importantly, it gave them the opportunity, for the first time ever, to make the playoffs. Minus the 2 expansion teams from 1976, who were in their infancy, with those 2 teams being the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Seattle Seahawks, every other team in NFL history had made it to the playoffs at least once before. Everyone else, minus the Saints. But through 13 weeks in 1979, with a 7-6 record, they were tied with the Los Angeles Rams for the division lead. It was fine to start believing. By no means could you pencil in a playoff spot. Obviously, that would be absurd. At the very least, though, you could have that thought in the back of your mind, that maybe, just maybe, this would be the year. And after the Saints beat the Falcons on the road by a final score of 37-6, officially eliminating the Falcons from the playoff hunt, and making the NFC West a 2-horse race between the Rams and the Saints at 7-6, you would think that it would be fine for the Saints to put the playoff tickets on sale. It's funny, because a reporter asked Saints head coach Dick Nolan after a victory earlier in the season at the end of October, a 14-10 win against Washington, whether they should start putting the playoff tickets on sale right then. To which Nolan said, "That's like telling a pitcher he has a no-hitter going into the 4th inning. We're a team that hasn't had a winning season, and we're striving for that, to establish this feeling. We can't look too far down the road, or we'll get tripped up." But obviously, there's a major difference between a joke in Week 9 with 7 games to go, and Week 13, which is 3 games to go, when you actually have to start thinking about logistics, and with just 2 teams alive in the hunt for the NFC West title. And obviously, while no one didn't want the playoff tickets on sale until the team actually made the playoffs, the Saints ticket office was expecting the NFL to give them the go-ahead to sell the tickets, since the team had the division lead with 3 games left, and since it was commonplace and actually mandated, as mentioned before, for tickets to go on sale at this point. They were waiting on the call from the league office. And eventually, they did get the call, although it was not the call that they expected. Because instead of the league office telling the Saints that they could get started on printing out playoff tickets, since this was league protocol, since this was mandatory, and the team had a legitimate shot of making the playoffs and hosting a playoff game, the league office told them, not so fast. We still don't think you guys are for real. Just hang tight. That's right. Imagine the NFL breaking its own protocol because they didn't believe in a team whatsoever to actually make the playoffs, and that's what you've got with the 1979 Saints. The NFL told the Saints, don't waste your money or do anything just yet. Don't make your ticket people work. Even though you're leading the division and are clearly in the playoff picture, hold your horses. As one Saints spokesman said, we got a call from the league, but they advised us to hold off for a while. Head coach Dick Nolan, who was both happy about this and confused about this, said it's a league rule that you have to have tickets printed at a certain time. But they called and told us to hold off for a while. In other words, it's almost like if you're working in graphics and you have to have pre-made graphics made for any possible outcome. It's the final of the 100-meter dash, and you've got graphics made for 7 of the 8 people, but you don't even bother making a graphic for the 8th person because you figure that they have no shot at making it. Well, that's what the NFL did here. They told the Saints to not sell playoff tickets just yet, essentially breaking their own protocol. Now, you might be saying to yourself that maybe this was a league-wide thing. Maybe times were different back then, and that the NFL just didn't want playoff tickets going on sale with 3 weeks left in the season, period, unless your team was already in the playoffs and had clinched a spot. And if that was the logic, I guess it would make sense. Except for the fact that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 2 weeks before, so after week 11, started putting playoff tickets on sale, even though they had not even come close to clinching a playoff spot. In fact, the Bucs, while they would eventually make it to the playoffs in 1979, had to win in week 16, the final week of the season, against the Kansas City Chiefs, just to make it in. Their fate was coming down to the final week of the season, and yet, the NFL gave them the go-ahead to start selling tickets in mid-October. Other teams also were selling tickets by this point. From all accounts, this seemed to be a policy exclusively meant to single out the Saints, with the NFL having such little faith in them that they called to say, hey, I know other teams are selling playoff tickets right now, and we let them do that. But you guys really shouldn't do that. Why was that the case? Well, the Saints had an absolutely brutal final stretch to the season. Even though the Saints were 7-6, by no means were they out of the woods. It's a stretch that very few teams in the league would be able to go 2-1 against. In Week 14, the Saints had to play the Oakland Raiders on Monday Night Football, in a game that I talked about in a previous video of mine, so you can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. The Raiders, much like the Saints, were 7-6, and were playing some red-hot football, as after a 1-3 start of their own to the season, they won 6 of their next 9 games to get to this point. In Week 15, the Saints had to follow that up by playing the San Diego Chargers, considered by many to be the best team in all of football. San Diego, through 13 weeks, was 10-3, boasting the best record in the NFL, along with an offense that had scored 333 points, which was just 1 off of the league lead, and a point differential of plus 122, which was the top total in football by a good amount. And in Week 16, to close out the year, the Saints had to travel on the road to take on the Los Angeles Rams, which was going to be tough for two reasons in particular. Number one, the Saints lost the earlier meeting to the Rams when they played in New Orleans, as the Rams won that one handily by a final score of 35-17. And number two, the Saints and Rams, historically speaking, had met 10 times before in Los Angeles. The Rams won 9 of those meetings. The Saints trying to beat the Rams in Los Angeles, at least from a historical perspective, was like betting all of your money on green at a roulette wheel. Your odds are stacked against you. It's not impossible, but history tells you it's pretty unlikely. Over the final 3 weeks of the season, the Saints had to play a 7-6 team that was red hot, a 10-3 team that was the best team in football according to many, and a 7-6 team that they could never seem to beat on the road. 3 teams with a winning record, and 3 teams with a shot at the playoffs. 3 teams with a combined record of 24-15, or a winning percentage of 61.5%. That is brutal, no matter how you want to slice it. In fact, it was so brutal that I looked at every team in their strength of schedule over the final 3 weeks of the season, as it was after week 13 of the season. The higher the number, the tougher your schedule is, as it means your 3 opponents left have a high combined winning percentage. The Saints actually had the 5th toughest strength of schedule remaining in football, with their opponents having that combined winning percentage of 61.5%. The 4 teams ahead of them? Well, they were the Denver Broncos, the Buffalo Bills, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Houston Oilers, all of whom play in the AFC and have no bearing on New Orleans' playoff status whatsoever. So if we go ahead and eliminate all of the AFC teams from this chart and just focus on the NFC teams, what we find is that the Saints have the toughest schedule left, and they're actually the only NFC team to have a strength of schedule remaining above 60%. In fact, of the 14 teams in the NFC, the Saints were just one of 2, alongside the Minnesota Vikings, to play a team in each of their final 3 weeks that had a winning record after week 13. Long story short, their schedule was absolutely brutal, and their competition for the NFC West, the Los Angeles Rams, did not have a brutal schedule, with 2 of their final 3 games being against teams below 500, and the other being at home against the Saints. So it makes some sense that the league was pessimistic about the chances of the Saints actually finishing the deal and making the playoffs for the first time ever. And to be fair to the NFL, even though they told the Saints not to sell playoff tickets despite the fact that everyone else was selling playoff tickets, their intuition was correct. The Saints ended up losing 2 of their final 3 games, as they lost to the Oakland Raiders after collapsing on Monday Night Football, and they got shut out at the hands of the San Diego Chargers. The Saints would finish the season with an 8-8 record, not good enough to make the playoffs, as the Los Angeles Rams won the division at 9-7. And even though it was the Saints' first season ever without a losing record, they would have to wait all the way until 1987 to make it into the playoffs for the first time ever. But still, that's not really the point. Just the fact that the NFL told the team, we have no confidence in you to actually do this, to the point where we're fine violating our own protocol, is somewhat insane, even if it ended up working out in the end for the league, and even if their intuition was right. The league knew the Saints' history. The league knew what the Saints had coming up for them. And the league just knew, even though they were literally tied for the division lead with 3 games to go, that they wouldn't make it to the playoffs. Because in 1979, the NFL essentially told the Saints that they probably weren't going to be marching into the playoffs anytime soon. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.